All right, wow, that's loud. I'd like to open the meeting of the April 17th City of Hood River Planning Commission.
presentation, and thank you for all the testimony we received from everyone. I have a question about the increased 10-foot setback that you agreed to.
Yeah.
And I believe that it had been mentioned in some of the testimony that perhaps that would resolve some of the issues with preserving the larger trees on the property. I don't know if that is true.
There are some trees along that setback that probably will be preserved now because there's the 10 feet instead, because there's quite a, it's a very dense, and some of those trees are actually not even on Stenberg's property, so they'll be preserved, of course.
Okay.
So yeah, there's definitely going to be some more that will be preserved. I do not know how many more.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That would definitely help that side.
Any other questions?
But don't know if you've had a chance to look at some of the different comments that been received from neighbors.
Yeah.
I know this is not something that is required at all by the Missingville Housing Code, but there was mention of adding off-street parking. Don't know if you can speak to the hypothetical feasibility of adding that or not adding that in terms of what that would do potentially to the build out of this plan.
Yeah, with the very sympathetic of that issue. The applicants are myself. The requirements are one off-street parking. Due to the size and the density that's allowed, with the amount of open space that needs to be, it'd be really difficult to actually add parking as well as meet open space. So that would be something that, and we were just sitting here talking about how in the world, can we squeeze something out? And it's very possible we could squeeze maybe another parking space somewhere, but there are very specific, because of the density, one of the things that middle housing does very well at is making sure there's plenty of room for cars to get in and out and move around. So the actual turn areas are pretty, they're not too big, they're modified, but there's quite a bit of room that has to be taken for that as well. But so it's probably something that needs to be addressed in the middle housing code.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I have an issue along those lines as well, just in that the density is not a requirement. So you're choosing to take the density to that level. The site is a very tight and constrained site, and so you're taking a choice there whether to prioritize an additional unit versus having a little bit of breathing room around these developments. And I am sympathetic because I live very close to this and I go by this almost every day on a bicycle. So I can just tell you that, taking cars out of here and having them appear on Frankton or Post Cannon or even across the road in a car is not an option. Right? So
yeah,
I would urge you to take a look at how you can make sure that you contain all parking and sprinter vans in your own area. I think we in the Planning Commission have seen this story so many times before. If you go to Dana Young Lane, you will see what happens when you build a very tight neighborhood with a single car garage that are never used, and all of the 2 cars plus sprinter vans are out on the street in neighborhood streets. So I would really urge you to take a look at that.
yeah.
I'd just like to clarify something. I'm not stating that I have an issue with the parking. I was just asking just for
Yes.
a point of clarification to see what is potentially possible or not possible.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, any further questions for the applicant?
Or
Okay.
a general question. Sorry, I have a comment or a question, and I don't know if maybe this is something that staff can also chime in. There was also a mention about the possibility of somewhat resolving this issue by putting parking signs in very particular parts on Frankton Road, and then also in the shared parking at the adjacent development. I don't know off the top of my head how much of an additional cost that would be, if there's any any pathway to even require them to do that Or if that could in any way be some kind of a resolution to some of the issues with the parking.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be like a public works staff thing.
Okay,
Thank you, Commissioner Hoffman. We have reached out to the city engineering department and the county public works department as well to see if they had any feedback on adding signing to preclude or prevent parking adjacent to the site. We don't have anything in writing from them yet. The recommendation would not be to require, but maybe recommend, give us some time to continue working with them. One issue that I mentioned earlier with respect to site distance at the intersection of the cul-de-sac and Frankton Road. And I don't know if in order to meet site distance requirements, that may end up eliminating parking on the west side of Frankton. Not certain, but we suggested in a condition of the applicant works with the city engineer on that issue to make sure that the design is consistent with the traffic assessment letter recommendation.
I think just generally speaking, when it comes to administration control of the right of way, there's a public works engineering function. So I think this it's important to give it time and consideration, but you know, if you wanted to recommend that, it should be a recommendation. And if it's a solution that is acceptable or supportable by public works or the city's engineer, or since this is crossing over between the city and county jurisdiction, director of public works. So we wouldn't want to bind them to it. You can usurp their authority and traffic engineering expertise, but if you wanted to call it to their attention as something that you would recommend them entertain if it's supportable, that's how we would recommend you consider it in your motion or action. That makes sense.
yeah, thank you.
All right, any other question for the applicant?
Is it possible for us to ask questions?
No, what will happen is he'll come up and testify and then they'll have a rebuttal afterwards. So we're gonna,
It was not testimony or anything like that. It's just a question on revised design. I just wondered if that was available. It sounds like. So,
There's copies over there. Are those available?
okay.
Yes.
all right, thanks, Austin.
Yes.
All right, so now what we'll do is we'll hear public testimony. We'll have that in three sections versus proponents, i.e. those in favor of the design, the plan. Then we'll have neutral and then we'll have opposed. So let's start with anyone who is wanting to speak as a proponent. Again, for our audience members on the video conference, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. For those on the phone, it's *9. Do we have anyone? Seeing none, we'll move over to opposed. Neutral. Neutral?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm
State your
Sue
name.
Powers.
Record.
Sue Powers, 605 Tom's Drive, and my property that's on the west side, their west side, my east side. And I did submit written statements earlier, but I just want to kind of follow up on a couple of additional comments because I think, I don't know, but I'm guessing everyone here is going to speak about parking, and it's just kind of a scary picture that everyone is envisioning. And I don't think we have a way around it given the code. However, I would like to say, just for public safety's sake, there are some big issues with the crest of the hill at Frankton, but also the fact that Car Drive is going to become the egress out of Willow Pond, I believe. And there's going to be more traffic, but there's also going to be a lot of cyclists, young going to school type cyclists going across Frankton to get onto Car Drive, because that's now how they're going to get to the West Side Trail. It used to be down on Blackberry Drive, and it was really well used by a lot of elementary school age kids on bikes. So I really think we should take into consideration, putting a crosswalk on Frankton. And I don't know if it mentioned that a section of Frankton will become a city street. So I'm also hoping the speed limit will be reduced, but I don't know how that works compared to the county. So I don't know if those can be conditions of approval or just recommendations to engineering and public works. But I would love to see a crosswalk and a reduced speed, because coming down Frankton, if you're coming north down the hill, that speed limit is 40, right to Post Canyon, and then you've got 200 feet, and then you've got all this traffic is going to start coming in and out of car because we've got 2 new developments, one of which is going to be very challenged on parking, and I can easily imagine people parking on the street kind of regardless quite frequently. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Any other neutral testimony? All right, go ahead. Okay, so that's any neutral? Okay, go ahead.
Hi,
State your name and address, please.
hi, Clinton Autorette at 625 Tom Drive. And I am on the north side of the property is my home. And one of the things that I was wanting to ask and to the planning department about the condition of the property was, would you guys want to know if the property was built on fill, or the property was brought up to fill unengineered? So this happened, the neighbor who owned the property before me was Mr. Young. And he had lots of equipment and he was always kind of getting deals around town. So he brought in the fill and he brought up maybe 3 to 4 feet. And so I'm his neighbor. And so there's a large, probably from here to the floor there of what the fill is. And that happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So that's always been a concern to me because it's affected some of the water. And I would hate to see the project get built and then it kind of ran into problems because it really wasn't structurally ready to be built on. So maybe there needs to be some testing of the consistency of the earth. So that's one concern. And the other one was that when Mr. Young lived there before he brought it, there was a large incinerator on the property, and it looked like something that you would see at Hamill's Mill. It was about 25 feet high and about 15 feet wide. And Mr. Young was a road specialist and a dynamite guy. He built roads. Well, for probably, I've lived there since 2001, he consistently built or burned toxic materials in the incinerator. So I've always been concerned that the fill came in, covered up the incinerator. I don't know what was kind of buried under all this, but to me, it's something I think that you guys should know about. Those are 2 of my concerns. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, other neutral testimony? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
State your name and address for the record.
Yeah, Tim Mayer, I'm Sue Powers' husband, and I also live at 605 Tom's Drive, which is a property directly west and abutting the Stenberg property. And I think you all got my written testimony. I assume you've all read it and everything. So I just wanted to highlight a couple things there, really. The first is, I think there was a recommendation by staff that the city engineer coordinate with the developer and the developer certified arborist to determine which trees will be retained on that new on that buffer, on that extended setback on the west side. So I would like to highlight that as we really fully support having the city engineer being the person making the determination. It seems like he's a neutral party, a trusted source. I guess I trust his judgment on that. So that's one thing I'd like to say. I also would make the point that retaining that buffer, I'll make the point to these guys too, seems like a really going to make the site a lot more attractive and a lot more marketable. I think Austin would acknowledge this. I don't think you want to be building houses where people are peering into other people's bedrooms. So keeping the trees there is a good thing. The other thing is the stormwater that Clinton was alluding to. He was alluding to the fill, and I just brought that up in my testimony. When that fill was placed, I believe it was about 8 years ago or so, but it was a while ago, but it wasn't permitted, it wasn't designed or engineered or anything. And we just started getting a lot more groundwater during the winter over on our property and on the neighboring property to the north. And I'm a hydrologist, so I'm kind of clued into, changes in water around the house. We started seeing standing water all winter. And we have a spring in the road that was created by that created a pothole in the road. That seemed to be about the same time. So I just wanted to document all that. And I'm concerned. I don't know what potential problems will occur in the future, but I'm concerned about stormwater drainage and more groundwater inflow coming our direction with the new impervious surfaces being added. So I think that's everything. You read the testimony. I'm glad to answer any questions if you have anything about that. I will also say that Kim's testimony, my neighbor to the north, she submitted written testimony. I think you've seen that too. Happy to answer any questions about that too, because she sent that to me first, and we've talked a little bit. So that's it.
If you're saying that pothole on Tom's Drive came right about that time?
Yeah, it appeared about the same time now. Whether that was coincidence or related to the increased groundwater flow, is definitely more groundwater flow toward our direction, toward our house, and to Kim's house, since that fill got placed there. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Tim.
All right.
Okay, next up, mutual testimony.
Hello, my name is Eric Albertson. I live at 4005 Stonegate Drive, adjacent to the north of the proposed development. There are really two things that I wanted to bring up. And the first is in reading chapter 1725 of the Middle Housing Ordinance or Code, it talks about creating, I won't read the whole thing, but providing opportunities for creative and high quality infill development that is compatible with existing neighborhoods. And while I recognize that that's not one of the decision criteria that you use to approve or deny these applications, I just wanted to say that when you look at that area, having 16 homes on 1.3 acres with garage only parking and very little bike ped infrastructure does not feel very compatible with that neighborhood. And I know that there aren't very many of these developments that have been done so far on Hood River, but if you look at the development on Hull Street, I think that stands in stark contrast where you've got 4 homes. It's a great fit with the neighborhood, very similar architectural styles, and also ample access to other bike ped services as well as ample on-street parking. So I just wanted to point that out for your consideration. The other thing is around parking, and I won't reiterate what some of the other folks have already said through oral or written testimony. When I tried to figure out what this might look like, the other analog that I could find aside from Dana Lane was Stella Lane, and I've driven by there a number of times. And there are 18 units there, so 2 more units than are proposed here, a little bit different. They have quite a bit of guest parking, but I've driven by there probably a dozen times and observed anywhere between 14 and 34 vehicles parked in that development. And whereas I recognize that's not required by code, I often find myself wondering where all those vehicles will go, and will drivers on Frankton have enough sight distance to be able to avoid my 2-year-old and 5-year-old when they're out playing in that area. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to mention for consideration. And I also just feel that as we do this, I think middle housing is great. I think it's really good to increase density. We need affordable options. I'm used to living in much denser places than I do right now. So I love that. I also just think it's really important that we do this well out of the gate so that we don't create barriers for other people or additional pushback when we try to do this in the future. So I just appreciate those considerations. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Any other mutual testimony? All right, so let's move on to those opposed. Any would like to speak?
That's not the old post.
Do I need to do anything? My name is Jeff Sakery. I live at 4030 Post Canyon Drive, just to the west of the property. I also own the property to the north or to the south of it as a rental. So I border about 35% of the property. You have my notes. I'm not going to speak about parking, although parking is going to be horrendous. And I think it's unicorn dreams to believe that they're not going to park on Frankton, Stonegate, Carr, everywhere, which is going to be problematic because the big issue I have is safety. The renters, the only complaints I ever hear, and they exit onto Frankton, is about getting out of that dark driveway.
So it's already dicey. It's already at an angle. They have problems doing it already. I can't imagine what it's going to be like when we add this. And when we have cars parked along the sides of those streets, which you guys can say it's not going to happen. Unicorn dreams again. So it really, something needs to be done about the parking. There has to be some off-street parking available in that thing. I don't have a fundamental issue with the annexation. I don't have a fundamental issue with the partition. I have an issue with the density and the lack of parking and safety. So.
Thank you.
My name is Marie Baruki and I live at 4070 Stonegate Drive, which is not neighboring, but I'm in the neighborhood that this particular division is inserting itself inside of, if you look at a map. So I see this division is impacting our whole neighborhood. And the people that are next to this unit in Stonegate have all been, I think, very kind and not involving any of the neighbors at all in this. Otherwise, you might see a few more comments. But I wanted to talk about smart homes, which I like some of them that I've seen in Portland. I don't think Hood River is accustomed to dealing with them, or that's my impression from what I'm seeing with the response. But the location of this particular place is not where I would put a set of smart homes, and it's not where Portland would put them. They're supposed to be near transportation. They're supposed to have bike routes. They're supposed to be stores near them. They're supposed to be churches and schools. There are schools. So none of those things are near. So because of Hood River's had difficulty putting them within your city boundaries, you're going to annex into our area, our block, instead of keeping it within the other side of Frankton or within where the traffic is. And you're putting them right in the crosshairs of traffic. This makes no sense to me with what I've read smart homes are about. Second is the layout internal to the smart homes. It says in Hood River's ordinances that they're supposed to have porches and bike racks. These have garages in front of them. So I don't see how you all are even looking at approving these at this meeting. That's there on the plans. So I'm confused. And I have to say, I didn't like that, although I would love to see a set of smart homes inset near us. I just don't think this is quite right with what I see either regionally with Frankton and Post Canyon and there, and then locally within our neighborhood. And then I think isn't it a Hood River rule of how many smart homes you can build at one time? And aren't they supposed to be inset into an area to build in, to fill in? This is not what's being done. So the process seems backwards to me. It doesn't seem right. So that I don't like this as a first example of how we're putting smart homes in. It's like a city chasing things out to the suburbs, and it's worse than that to me. Okay. The landscaping that I've seen on the plans does not match at all the landscaping in the area. And that bothers me because I don't think anybody is seeing that. And it'll be just the trees and the buffer, I don't think is enough to be thinking about for that area. And I also talked to a construction person about the infill, and that was one of the lower areas. And we are in a wetland, and that has changed how the water has come through. And the person, I could say his name, that talked about how it had been infilled over the years, says he doesn't see how we're going to be able to retain all the water on the site that's going to come from the homes and the drain off. And I don't know that that was addressed in what I have seen. So I hope a good look is taken at that. I have a few more things to say that are perhaps better said at a later time. But are we going to put this in before we get the parks built for this kind of density of people to take care of them so that they will have a park to go to? Currently, there is a park, but where they're going to come into is in our neighborhood, and we have welcoming neighbors, but that's where the kids will come into play, is into our neighborhood. And we aren't part of the city of Hood River. And you don't take care of our parks. And we have them. Okay, and I think that's enough. I hope you understand that to me, and I would think, well, it just doesn't seem like you're doing what we're hoping to be doing with smart homes and high density homes and middle housing.
Thanks, Marie. All right, that's it for those signed up. Anyone else want to provide public testimony? Staff, can I just clarify a couple of questions that just came up? You want to just respond to the question about parks, because that was evaluated in your staff report.
I think you see some. Thank you, Jeff Ross. I think you see some findings in the staff report in the section on the annexation that addresses the inventory of parks that currently serve the broader community. And we don't have a criterion in place that says prior to annexation or prior to development, we need to, for example, implement the Parks District's park master plan by building a new park in advance. One of the things that occurs in association with development is payment of system development charges for various parts of the infrastructure that are required, including for parks. So as people build homes, system development charges for parks are collected at that time. And ultimately, over time, the Parks District makes decisions about purchasing and developing parkland when the timing feels appropriate. With respect to the Stonegate neighborhood, any parks in Stonegate are privately owned, maintained by the homeowners association. Testimony is correct. The city does not maintain parks in Stonegate neighborhood.
Thank you for that. Also, the water runoff, the fill, the potential contamination on the site. Is there anything that we are concerned about or we would want to cover in our conditions?
With respect to the fill, I think we could, if the planning commission is feeling like it's not covered sufficiently in the staff report as it exists, I think we could highlight through some additional findings, concerns about based on testimony presented, concerns about fill placed on the site by a previous owner, potential effects on neighborhood property owners with respect to stormwater and potential for contamination of the site based on burning that formerly occurred there. There are a couple of conditions that are in the staff report right now. One with respect to provision of the stormwater management report. So before the developer gets to construct homes, they'll be working with the city engineering department to put together a stormwater management plan consistent with city engineering standards that will take a look at soils and other conditions to make sure that stormwater is addressed at least in a manner that's consistent with city standards. That's what I can tell you right now. With respect to construction on fill that hasn't been compacted, that's something that typically comes up both at the engineering stage as the development team is working with the city engineer on the final engineering plans. Again, that could be highlighted in some findings, say engineering department, just want to make sure you're aware of this based on the testimony received. Also comes up at the time of building permit submittal. If the building official had concerns about construction on unengineered fill, that might be a time when the building official would require provision of a geotechnical analysis or other engineering document to demonstrate that construction is feasible.
Got it. Dustin, question for you.
One other point of clarification, just for the record, our stormwater management ordinance is based upon pre-development conditions. So when we refer and when engineering reviews this, it's not based on its current condition. All the calculations and methodology go back to pre-development. So there was fill that impacted within the past 20 years that has impacted this site's ability. We are going to look back prior to any development on the site when evaluating storm or when our engineering teams evaluate stormwater. So impacts should be considered from a pre-development condition, not a somewhat post-development or call it maybe a mid-development condition if there's been some work on the site that has changed the calculations. So just for that, for the record, we do look back further than fill that may be 10 years.
Thanks. I'm asking these questions just because I know the applicant's going to come up with a rebuttal. So I'll be interested in their comments to those two issues of stormwater and the fill. Last question for you, Dustin. Especially seeing the renderings of the site. I know when we put together the missing middle housing code, it was our hope and desire that we would create neighborhoods that were people friendly, bike friendly. One of the things about the former architect, one of the things that I know about developing cities is, putting parking at the back of houses, putting houses towards the front of the streets. You get surveillance of the street, people interacting with the street. What I'm seeing here is a design which is very garage heavy, facing the street, and this is just the first 3 buildings, 6 units. And as I look at the plans for the future development, it's not headed in the right direction in my mind. Do we have anything with the middle housing code that we have that can review this from a kind of what our intent was in terms of livability of that neighborhood?
Yes, it's 1725 is the standard. I think one of the particular items of interest comes to building orientation. That the buildings are intended to be front facing or oriented towards the street. I think that's 1725I is that provision. Certainly the house with the eastern facing elevation has its front porch facing the street. We may want to double check on the units to the south to ensure that those units where fronting the street have their front porch facing that way. The building towards the south and east doesn't necessarily have frontage, so it has some flexibility, but clearly some of the key features in terms of orienting the buildings are having their front. So I know that the building, again, to the westernmost bias, the end of the extension of Carr certainly fronts. I think we would want to do some confirmation on the percentage of windows that face that area. I know the applicant has provided some confirmation on that. We just want to make sure that when the time comes for building permits that we follow through with that 15% that's required. And then on the south, we want to make sure that we get an orientation of that building that is considers Carr Drive, again, the front of that building.
So, but this is the only time we're going to see this at the planning commission, right?
The only time the planning commission will see.
So what can we do now about 4 garage doors facing the street and no observable front door?
Porch, excuse me, it's supposed to have a porch that's in your ordinances.
Yeah, front facing porch. Again, for one building, I can confirm based on the rendering is there. The second, we may want to have that and address that and maybe take another look.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Let's have the applicant back up for the closing remarks and rebuttal.
Yeah, thank you. kept a little list here. Great comments. from everybody. So the first thing I was concerned with crosswalk. I believe that is required for the applicant to place a crosswalk across Franklin to connect with what is the
Car drive.
to Car Drive or Sunburst or what it was, yes. So that will be, there will be a crosswalk. The fill, yeah, we're aware of the fill. Again, this is the application phase, so we haven't done any construction, anything like that, but for as part of engineering process, there's certain standards we have to meet. Some of them are cities, some of them are also just good design. So for example, for stormwater, we will be digging potholes around the property to figure out what the infiltration rate is. And one of the things that we do is potholes. We also look at the geotech of the surface just to see what we're going to be building on for, roads, sidewalks, and all that kind of stuff. So that is a standard practice. And it has to be done for the stormwater to determine the infiltration rate, because if the water goes away fast, then it changes the way. And if it doesn't go away, then it totally changes what we do for stormwater, because we do have to meet stormwater retention and release requirements. So the fill will be an issue, and obviously no one wants to build on fill. So when the construction actually happens, contractors will excavate down to good soil or do some sort of alternate design if they have to. I did not know anything about an incinerator and contaminated soil. That would probably be something we'll be looking at, because we certainly want to build on anything that's buried under there. So that's a great comment. As far as the trees, there are city, this is for the landscape that was brought up. There are requirement of trees and shrubs that have to be placed every so feet. And so our application was more of a presentation of we can meet that necessary versus how it's actually going to be done. I believe that a landscape plan has to be presented as part of the construction. And as far as what those trees and those plants are, an arborist or a landscape architect or somebody would come up with that. And I believe the city also has approved plans for that. Again, stormwater was brought up, and we have to, as Dustin mentioned and is in the conditions, the stormwater has to be retained. There's engineering standards and design. There we'll have to do that not only for the houses, but also for the half street improvement for Frankton. We have to deal with that road water. We have to deal with the road water for the new car court. And then, of course, water from the parking and housing. So that will be one of the engineering challenges we have. And yet, it's something that gets done. Of course, parking has been brought up. I don't know the solution for parking. That's phones. That could be a potential solution. Maybe just rearranging things. I don't know about that. As far as there are porches, and again, the design was based on the fact that so there are, every house has the again, in their house design we showed the 5x6 porch. Any of the buildings that are adjacent to the road, we did point those porches to the road. The two houses on this that are on the south side, or the two sets of houses, just for the way the road to get in and the width, with this density, the garages have to be in front. But again, that was my understanding that because they weren't adjacent to the road, that would be okay. There are some, I think, architectural elements that have not been, one of the things that's required is that there are multiple architectural requirements. And again, the houses have not been fully designed, but they will meet those. And we probably need to look at, maybe making those garages not so obvious as garages, but there are porches between the garage and the house as you go down the side. I believe we will put bike racks, and I believe I have bike racks in the preliminary plan to show bike racks, because that is a requirement. We will, of course, be placing landscape that's approved by the city, as well as, I think, you know, in line with what's around there. And of course, with parks, as Kevin has mentioned, we're not necessarily required to provide parks, but there are, I mean, particularly this first one, there is kind of a larger area that's open. That will be a open area there on the north side for people kids to run around or dogs to go on. So there is if the whole thing ever gets developed out, there are actually some larger areas connected that do allow people to move around and dogs to run around and kids to play toss a frisbee or whatever. So I think that addressed most of those concerns.
I think, is there a difference between the annexation application that we saw and this rendering here? Because I think the plan as it was built out in the full site showed different orientations for, we'll say, this building.
Those should be the pictures that represent the, let me grab my plan. Those are on the middle housing. Like if you look at like the revision we did of just on the MH 2.0, that's the same layout that we're showing there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a discrepancy between the middle housing document and the annexation document. If I'm reading that right.
I didn't know that we even placed those, but there could be. I didn't know that we even showed. Maybe we had do we have a full build out on the annexation?
Awesome. Yeah, one of the plans that said this just overall.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that's the same. Yeah, that's the same picture as that most westerly development with the houses. It's the same layout for the first proposed middle housing.
Okay. I think I had seen this plan here, Evan. You know, that was in the IT, but got a couple of different versions of this.
Oh. Okay. I think that might even, I don't know, that might have been a pre-submission. Yeah, that was very early on design.
Well, I like more what was happening then.
Okay.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Bell?
I have a question, just regarding the crosswalk. Would the county or the city be, who would pay for the signs? The crosswalk, you said that's.
I believe that is going to pay for signs.
Also signs, the right yellow, both west and east side of it. And then.
I'm not sure exactly what the sign requirements are, but there are requirements, yes. For the crosswalk signage. And I think there's even there might be a sign that tells people there's a crosswalk. I think.
We just want to make sure that if we don't want to have a problem. Like people at home that are watching this, we want to make sure that we get this stuff on the record too. Sorry.
So the question for the audience was, who's paying for the crosswalk and will it be signs?
And my understanding is in the conditions of approval, that's the applicant that does that.
Yeah, the city does ask the applicant to pay for any signage.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. No,
Thank you very much.
all right. With that, let's have our staff recap, please.
Thank you, Chair Frost. I guess a question to the commission ultimately, do you feel like it's necessary to add some additional findings to address some of the concerns that have been raised tonight with respect to fill on the property, affecting potentially stormwater of neighboring properties, past practices on the property, and included an incinerator and some burning. Again, we do have some conditions drafted regarding the requirement to provide a stormwater management report, where I think some of this background work would be performed, but certainly can add findings and or conditions if necessary to address concerns there.
Yeah, I think I would say that would be a no-brainer for us here, is to make sure that, I mean, it'll be done per city engineering standards, stormwater management. But if we could add some words to the effect of reviewing the fill and potential contamination.
In addition, one of the comments that we heard this evening with respect to traffic safety, in addition to recommendation for adding a crosswalk, was to reduce the speed limit. As we talked about, this annexation occurs in an area that is primarily in the county's jurisdiction. Well, it's entirely in the county's jurisdiction today. We're talking about bringing in just a short segment of Franklin Road into the city's jurisdiction with this annexation. We can coordinate with the county. I don't think the city's in a position right now to say we would apply a lower speed limit on this 270-foot long segment of Franklin. Certainly with the coordination with Hood River County, but we have initiated a conversation with the county about speed limit reductions elsewhere in the city, out on West Cliff Drive, for example. And happy to bring this up with county Public Works and Engineering Department.
It would seem. It would seem that if you're putting
You
a
want to come up to the microphone and state your name.
comment, it would seem that if you're putting in a crosswalk and there are blind spots on the north and the south of Franklin going into this 270-foot section, it would just like 25 wouldn't be a bad limitation. It would seem to make sense. It would seem not to make sense not to put in a speed limit reduction there. It is 40 to the south. That's pretty fast to be coming over the hill, cresting, and then find somebody in the crosswalk.
So
And
it
this is
seems like it's about 50 feet away from the 30-mile-an-hour change, where it goes from 40 down to 30 miles an hour. So to ask for it to go from 40 down to 25 as you enter the city and turn onto May Street, which is also 25, that it wouldn't be that terrible to do. Also coming up the hill is it's a blind hill too onto May Street. So there's a whole junction there all the way down from this car drive down to really where May Street happens. And even down the hill to Summit View, it's a pretty dangerous blind area too, even though is Summit View in the city?
Some of it is not in the city.
No. All right, so will you take an action then on the county to talk to them about that?
I don't feel comfortable implementing condition of approval that requires a speed limit reduction, but certainly we bring this up with the county to initiate evaluation of speed limit reduction on Franklin. As you point out, in addition to the additional traffic that's generated from development, got some vertical curves out there that create an issue today.
Right.
With respect to, I don't have anything to add with respect to vehicle parking. Got quite a bit of testimony on that. I would note that with respect to bicycle parking, the plans that show bike parking inside the units. That's what I've got for you. I don't have any other issues to address or respond to with respect to testimony tonight.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Chip Ross, actually, can I add one more thing? I don't think we've got a condition of approval in the document right now that requires a crosswalk across, right? Yeah, there is no.
I didn't see that.
That's just, yeah. I think we've got some requirements from engineering, Austin, with respect to ADA access, curb ramps, to meet federal standards. Right now, the transportation system plan doesn't show a crosswalk in that location. We don't have comments from the engineering department. Definitely just went through the PDF of the document just to search for crosswalk.
So it's just that we have to put in, so the ramps,
Okay.
I correct that.
Yeah, I don't feel great about implementing a condition that requires a crosswalk, but a recommendation to the engineering department to consider it seems appropriate, both in coordination with Hood River County's engineering department.
So here we go on parking. Here we go again on parking. Sue's rolling her eyes. And so is everybody else who's been on the planning commission. Dense middle housing, trying to get as many units in, we're back on parking. I mean, can we put in a conditioned approval to find 2 more spots? Is that something that is within our criteria? Is it 2 spots? Is it 5 spots? Is it 1? Is it none? I mean, where do we go from here on this?
So the next question, I mean, the ACC, the Adams Creek program, they require over 50% additional parking, what's required for 1 unit per unit. They have like 37 parking spots for 20 units. Why is middle housing requiring only 1 with no additional parking requirement? I mean, ACC
So-
is right in the middle of the city.
Yeah, let's bring this back. Sorry, go ahead.
No,
Dustin.
this is your question, you're here.
Yeah.
You have,
So my question is it within our bounds to request additional parking on the site, to be contained on the site?
you could make a request, when it comes to evaluating clear and objective standards for all housing needed, they meet them not.
Yeah,
So as staff, in this instance, we're not allowed to require additional parking beyond what is required by the code. And so you can request that they look at it, certainly. You can request that council consider it when they consider the annexation, but in terms of compliance, non-compliance, they are compliant with the
Yeah.
new space. It's a very academic way of looking at it. However, that is what we are required to do under state law when it comes to evaluating housing.
right, okay. All right, any other questions for staff? Okay, with that, I will close the hearing and we will move into our deliberation portion of the presentation or meeting. Do you want any topics to raise amongst the group? Issues, concerns?
My question is, we had any bandwidth to require more permission.
We can make a recommendation. We can't write it in as a condition of approval.
To make a comment on that, I am extraordinarily sympathetic to the issue of parking. And I'm also extraordinarily sympathetic to the issue of housing in our community. And I do believe that in enacting the middle housing zoning, that the parking issue was discussed with public testimony at the time. Is that correct? That was considered when making this a part of that particular ordinance. So it's not like it hasn't been discussed before. And I wish that there was a way that either the city or the city and the community could really start to think about this parking issue and address it in some other kinds of ways. Parking permits, residential parking permits, parking zones, I don't know what, but it continually comes up where it becomes an issue where we end up losing housing or we end up losing development. or we end up hating each other as neighbors because of this issue. So I don't personally think that we can put in a suggestion about it, but I think it's pointless. Other than just kind of lip service, as far as approval or not. But I do think that we should try and figure out what we can do about the parking.
Can I make a comment too on this?
Yes.
Sorry.
No,
I mean,
no, we're in
Sorry.
deliberation.
sorry. So, again, if you want to put one in.
We can make a
not
recommendation.
opposed,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of making a recommendation if this is something that you don't have any latitude on. Also speaking to the applicant to ask about that, and they indicate that there's not really a lot of wiggle room in there. I'd also like to add that when all of this deliberation was going on, the missing middle housing code back in 2021, 22. I don't know, years all went together at this point. But the original ask that the city was going for, I believe, was 0.75 spaces per unit, and the compromise ended up being 1 space per unit. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I understand the realities of situations with people having Sprinter vans that take up a bunch of space on the street that is problematic, but I'm not in favor of disturbing development for Sprinter vans.
Were these guidelines put in place for properties currently within the city limits, or is this, and I know obviously we would require annexation, but in terms of the parking, those we like procedurally, is that?
What we're talking about is in this middle housing code that we developed, there was a lot of conversation about how much parking to mandate goes along with it, and the development actually meets and exceeds that mandate. The challenge is that the garage can be counted as meeting the mandate. Nobody uses the garage, they're out on the street with their 1 car, their 7 cars somewhere else on the street or down the road. Okay, any other questions or concerns?
I think that the recommendations that they mentioned about adding emphasis on the fill and the tree preservation were all good.
Yeah.
The traffic speed limit issues should be included somehow.
And the crosswalk. Yeah.
All right, I'm just making sure we captured everything here. So I think on the applicant, we're asking to include a little bit more language on the stormwater management to make sure that we are covering the fill and potential contamination at site. We also want to include the tree preservation by review by city engineer. We also want to include no parking signs on the street, Frankton. And in terms of recommendations, we have a recommendation for the applicant to look at increasing the parking. We have a recommendation to the applicant on looking at orientation of buildings to make sure that we have front porches out onto the street. And in terms of the city, I don't think this is for the applicant, but we have a recommendation to build a crosswalk. I think that's it. Okay. I would entertain a motion. Since you're close. Engineer.
If I could jump in real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's gonna be a motion a recommendation to council on the annexation, not a decision there.
Right.
A recommendation for a decision on the partition. of the housing commission.
Want my notes here. I'm looking for a motion approving the recommendation to forward this to city council, file number 2022-66. With additional, well. Can I make the motion? Yeah. Can I make the motion?
Absolutely.
All right, so I'll make a motion to approve forwarding this application for an annexation to the city and a what should we call this? Middle housing project. With a couple of notes, we'd like to review and improve the conditions of approval, particularly around storm water management, drainage, and to do with the site fill and potential contamination on the site. Would also like to have a review of the condition approval around tree preservation to be reviewed by the city engineer. I'd like to make a recommendation to the applicant to review the parking situation and provide where possible additional parking spots off street. And also review the orientation of buildings to meet the intent of the missing middle housing code. Also, if you could review the no parking signs on the main streets outside on Frankton and Post Canyon. That is it.
Crosswalk recommendation.
Crosswalk recommendations to the city. And that is it. All right. So that is the motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a second. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, how do you vote?
Aye.
I also vote aye.
Aye.
And chair votes aye, motion passes. All right, thank you very much for your participation. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, we will draft PC decision for your review, just to make sure it captures your sentiment and the conditions applied for your signature.
Thank you. All right, with that, I will, that portion of the meeting is over. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your testimony and thought into this topic. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. All right, with that, we have some meeting minutes to approve from March 6th. That portion of the meeting is over. Thank you very much. All right, with that, let's continue the meeting. We have just one more item on the menu, which is the draft of the meeting minutes from March 6th. So thanks very much for turning this around so quickly. I read through the meeting minutes. I didn't see anything. It was mostly documentation of the public testimony for a project which has hence been disbanded. Any issues with the meeting minutes that anyone found? No. All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from March 6th.
I motion to approve the meeting minutes from March 6th. As
Yes.
they are.
Do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
All right, Bonnie has put a motion on the floor to approve the minutes. Kate has seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
I,
Motion passes. All right. With that, I think we are done. I think we're going to skip the vice chair discussion. Keep track of that. When somebody feels like they have earned their wings, we will bring that back at a later date. With that,
One last thing, if you check your calendars for the next couple meetings, we will have another matter coming before you, another annexation. So I was looking at May 15th. Or possibly.
so no meeting on May 1st.
Nobody on May 1st.
May 15th is good for me.
Or first week, June, Monday, June 5th. Would be the next two. We're getting the summertime, so I'm trying to be mindful of people disappearing.
I'm not a troublemaker until we get to July. Well, actually, no, yeah, no, July, that won't count. Yeah, it won't be the 31st of July. Yeah, so
I have no life and I'm.
Excellent,
say,
good answer.
both of those things are good for me, I never take vacation.
We appreciate your service. So if I have at least 4 of you looking at the 15th and the 5th as a remote possibility.
Yep.
Within your schedule, that helps me. Thank you.
all right, thanks for that. During the meeting, it is 7 o'clock.